And of course, the big problem ultimately is the food sources. You know, if the gulls and terns have all left the Pensacola area, which I'd not heard about, but I just saw, that's saying to me that they don't have food here.
Mm-hmm.
And before they've left, they probably could have been eating fish that had already ingested oil in the water, hadn't yet died. They can accumulate the oil, and it's a toxin within their bodies.
Yeah, I mean, after reading the report, I mean, it clearly states that, you know, it just lays down exactly how bad and, you know, how bad the animals, the wildlife is going to be affected. It's just like, you know, one right after the other. So what are they doing right now to stop this, to help with that?
Well, you know, I think we all have a pretty good idea. I hope we're going to learn how to do more and do better of stopping it. We have the booms and we have skimmers, and it's old technology. The drilling technology has advanced enormously in the last 20 or 30 years, but the prevention and cleanup technology has not. So, you know, booms and skimmers are good for oil that is on the surface. One of the consequences of the dispersant that they're spraying into the gusher is that we're not having the oil all on the surface. And a lot of it is going underneath the booms at this point. So we've changed the chemical nature of the oil in a way that makes it harder to capture and block it.
Stephen, I want to take another call on line one. We've got Alan joining us. Hello, Alan.
Hey, folks. How y'all doing?
Good. Good to have you.
Good. Let me start off by saying this. I am old, which means I've been around a long time. I'd like to give credit to where it's due. Ronald Reagan said that he was going to take the government off the back of businesses and turn businesses loose, and he did. What he did was, the first thing he did was he got rid of PATCO, the professional air controllers, and then what he did was set a precedent for removing all of the controls that were carefully put in place to arrive at a balance. We talked about OSHA. OSHA's budget was cut until they're just a skeletal whatever. But anyway, now we're seeing the results of all of those years of taking away the controls that are necessary to make sure that things are done in a proper way. About a week ago, I read a little article in the Times-Picayune about, and that's a bad newspaper, about George Bush in 2003. What he did was he did away with the requirements here in Louisiana for companies to actually, when they are applying for the leases, to actually do studies to show what they were going to do if they had catastrophic events. So he made it easier for for drillers to go out and do the things that they do. But what he did was he made it where they did not have to show that they had a plan to counter the situations like we're having now.
Yeah, I guess, and maybe that's because I'm really, Stephen, I'm interested in what you think about this. But when it comes to drilling a well like this, a mile down, you know, beneath the sea, it seems to me that if you had to actually come up with a plan that would show you could make a responsible response to a disaster like this, if that was a requirement, they wouldn't be able to drill, because the way I don't know, I'm not an expert in this, but it seems to me like there is no plan that anyone can put in place that can really do anything really significant to stop this disaster once it starts happening, other than what they're doing, which is drill a well over a couple of months.
Well, I kind of disagree, because from what I understand, Canada and other countries require that when you drill, you have to drill a relief well at the same time, just in case there's a situation like this.
Oh, there's an idea.
Absolutely. You don't wait until there's a problem and start drilling a relief well. No, you do that at the same time.
So that's government regulators driving up and doubling the cost of these people exploring for oil.
Well, what about the cost of what's happening now? I mean, this gentleman's saying he didn't see any birds or anything. You know what I'm saying?
I might be being a little sarcastic. I don't know.
I understand. I'm sorry. But the situation here is that, you know, if you're going to explore for oil that far down, then what you have to do, it has to be parallel. You have to, at the same time, create systems to prevent what's happening. It has to be done on a two-track basis. You can't just drill the hole and assume, well, when we have a problem, we'll invent a way how to take care of this. This same problem happened in Mexico, and they called it, instead of the top hat, they called it the sombrero. What happened was they tried all of those things, and nothing worked. The only thing that worked was drilling a relief well, and that took several months. And they knew that none of these things would work, but they had to do something to entertain the people to make it look like they're doing something. The relief well is the only thing that will solve this problem, and of course it takes a long time if it's not dug at the same time as the regular well is going to be dug.
Okay, and I think it's easy to lose sight of the fact that, one, British Petroleum is a worldwide company.
Oh, yes.
And that if this well wasn't spewing into the Gulf of Mexico, the plan was to have it spewing into tankers and going off to refineries, and they would actually be making lots and lots and lots of money every day, and probably someday will from this well make a lot of money. I understand they had profits prior to this, in the prior period before this disaster occurred, of $17 billion. So even the few billion they spent, this hasn't even really put a dent in them. So I think the expenses of taking some of these preventive measures might be well within the economic means of people that are doing business on that kind of scale.
I think our caller is basically right, that we've had experiments of just saying, well, we don't really need the government doing this. And we are paying a price of that in the Gulf right now. It is like saying, well, we don't really need to worry about the safety of our airplanes. The industry knows how to fly airplanes. And then all of a sudden you have some airplane crash. Air traffic controllers serve a purpose. Government regulators of something as inherently risky as drilling a mile deep in the Gulf into these enormous oil reservoirs that can gush. You need to have somebody looking at that and making sure that it's not just cutting the corners in the operations, that there's been advanced planning on what happens if you do have a catastrophic failure. All that was required was they look at a minimal failure in boilerplate language. That's just not enough. And that's not to say that it could have been stopped for sure if the government had done the job, but I think the odds would have been a whole lot better that it would have been stopped. And it's also true that if they were better prepared about what were to happen if it was a catastrophic failure, if there were plans, if there were booms lined up and everything else to move quickly, we could have controlled the damage that we're seeing.
Let's keep in mind that 8 years of Bush and Cheney, what they did was they filled the government with people from industry in the various departments. Their job was not to look out for the benefit of the nation, but to create laws that were palatable to business. And so just because you have an organization out there that has a name that infers that it's looking out for the people does not mean that they're, in fact, looking out for the people after Bush and Cheney for 8 years. After all, Bush and Cheney both were oil men themselves.
And what we're saying is not to be assaulting the oil industry. Again, I've heard from a lot of people in the industry, in personal conversations, in public conversations, and secondhand conversations have been reported to me. A lot of people in the industry saying BP made some really big mistakes, and the lack of government oversight made that possible. And people in the industry saying we need some more sensible regulation to provide a safer context for the things we're doing.
Well, and I think that's a great point, Stephen, because I think that one of the big lessons that we have here is that what your point of view is going to sometimes govern like how you look at different risks. And at the bottom line, as a lawyer, I don't think British Petroleum's duty is not to protect the people of the United States. Their duty is to make the biggest profit for their shareholders, which means they're going to look at risk one way. And the same guy, as a lawyer, I got friends that are on the other side. They're prosecutors or they work for the insurance companies, but we don't dislike each other. So if you take people from the oil industry and they become regulators, their different point of view, I think, contributes something, to the overall good. Because you're right. I think if we had someone there saying, well, wait a minute, why aren't we doing a relief well? What you're telling me is that the only that Canada's requiring that, and then we had another major disaster in the Gulf, and they already knew this. This wasn't even like they had to guess that the relief well was the only way they're going to fix this. They already knew that.
At the time, they were drilling in about 200 feet of water, and it was a catastrophe. And this time it was a mile down,